addressing such a group 50 years ago, here in Australia, or in the United States, that the colors that I would see would be brown and black, maybe white, maybe gray, but that would be it. Because it would have been a world of clerics and devout religious in their habits who had come. And yet today we have this very varied group with great numbers of lay people.
Really, the changes have come about primarily because of Vatican II, but Vatican II has its own history of what led up to Vatican II all through the early 20th century. And the gradual understanding among scholars and eventually at the council among bishops of the fact that the laity had had a much fuller role in the life of the early church, and the whole question about how can we bring this more to life today that arose since the council.
But much more radically, the council changed our religious imaginations, changed the way we image the church, the way we think about our church and ourselves in relation to it. It changed our imaginations, how we can imagine ourselves in this church.
The way we think about ourselves, the way we imagine ourselves, is what is primary in the way we act and the way we speak, and this shift from being passive to being active workers in the life of the church is of great significance, and the sense of the church being them rather than us, all of us together, is a great shift in the life of the church. And I would give as a parallel what happens in a country when people begin to think of themselves as part of a country. In the States, when we went from being the individual states and then moved to a consciousness of being a country together, it radically changed the behaviors that followed. And it's the imagination that has the greater impact on us. And what I've seen since the council is this deep sense of we are the church. That it's not denying the role. Catholics, the research shows this, value the role of their priests and their bishops, even when they disagree with them, but at times. But they have a sense that all of us together are the church, and that is a real change.
It's that vision which avoids the dualism of church versus world, of church apart from the world. It's that vision which affirms the vision of this conference on sacred ground.
That sense of shifting from a dichotomous understanding of church versus world, or church and world. We still use the language, but not in the same way. The sense that the good and holy church of God and the evil world, that just doesn't exist. I think that if we were to talk to our collegians today, they wouldn't understand what we were talking about, because there's been an embrace of the world. Now there's still, the church has its failures, the world has its failures. I don't mean to canonize this, either reality, but that we see ourselves as in communion with the world. We see ourselves as in dialogue with the leaders of the world. We see ourselves as in service of the world, as Jesus was. Jesus' focus was the poor and the sick, and those without meaning. The focus was not primarily building up the church community.
In this document, they say, it must be recognized that lay ministry, rooted in the priesthood of the baptized, is not a stopgap measure.
There are many people who think that the emergence of lay ministry and lay leaders of Catholic institutions is a function of shortages of priests and devout religious. I personally have pondered that a lot, and I'm aware of the fact that the first emergence began to occur in the mid-60s, before we were aware of any shortages. Now that doesn't mean there's not a causal connection, but I look very carefully at that the first DREs, the first youth ministers, the first directors of liturgy in parishes came forth in that early period before we were aware of the diminishment of the numbers. But secondly, theologically, that's sociologically looking at it. Theologically, when I look at it, I really ascribe to what Cardinal Mahoney and the priests of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles have said, that it is a fuller flourishing of ministries. It's a fuller expression of, just as the whole church worships and offers the liturgy, so the whole church brings forth ministries, volunteer ministries, leadership ministries, formal lay ecclesial ministries, the whole church. And I think theologically that is a very fruitful, very rich way to think about the life of the church and the Spirit drawing forth this life. And perhaps, and this we have no way of knowing for another 100 years, perhaps a form of ministerial life that is better suited to secularized societies, such as that in Australia, such as that in the United States, such as that in Western Europe.
It arises sometimes as a tension, a point of conflict, because we are still working out the new behaviors and the new structures that are needed in light of the changes that have come forth since the Council. And in the life of the Church, the period that has occurred since the Council is quite short.
I think dialogue is essential. A trustful dialogue. Robert Fitzgerald said it this morning, to dialogue in trust. That's a two-edged thing, or a two-sided thing. Laity have to trust their bishops, and that's not always there. And bishops have to trust the laity, and that's not always there. But one of the ways that trust grows is exactly through dialogue. The more I know someone, the more likely I am, unless the person's a scoundrel, to trust the person. The less I know them, the more likely I am to be distrustful, uncertain, afraid to be vulnerable before them. So dialogue, I think, is the absolute key. And secondly, the structures that permit, that foster the dialogue have to exist. Religious communities work that out. And there's still conflict at times between religious communities and bishops, but there are structures of communion, of dialogue between the congregations and the bishops that are very helpful. We don't have enough of that yet with the laity.